Let me explain it to somebody else without words. It opened up a way of thinking for me that actually began to lead me to my next step.
Bienvenue and welcome to Cirque du Soleil, a sonic trip brought to you by Cirque du Soleil, where we redefine the boundaries of creativity with some of today's most forward thinkers, doers, and creators. My name is Michel Laprise. I'm the creative guide and a stage director at Cirque du Soleil, and I'll be your host for today. Right now, in the background, you are hearing the spellbinding music of JOYA. This music is composed by Guy Dubuc and Marc Lessard, also known as Bob and Bill. JOYA is a very special Cirque du Soleil show that tells a story about the transfer of knowledge. It is set in a naturalist library that transforms into different exotic locations. It follows the journey of a rebellious young girl, and she is sent by her mischievous grandfather on a fantastical quest spanning generations. Today, we're going to discuss different ways of exploring the transfer of knowledge or learning, and specifically about the fusion of art and science. We're going to learn more about the ideology behind the Art-Science Fusion program, why combining mediums helps us see and understand things in new and different ways, and how the arts and sciences both have their unique creative elements and paths towards discovery. Diane Ullman, welcome to Cirque du Soleil. It's an honor to have you at the podcast.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and it's a real honor for me to be here with you today. I'm very excited about our conversation.
I think it's an exciting time in history because I feel sometimes we're like in the Italian Renaissance where science and art and humanities work together. And maybe we have to do that because of the challenges that are unprecedented for mankind and womankind, I would say. So it's a big honor, and I think we're going to learn a lot with you today. In broad strokes, what defines, I'm going to start with my big first question, what defines art-science fusion and the ideology behind it?
Well, thank you so much for that question. It's a good question. So unification is what's really at the center, I would say, the heart and soul of art-science fusion. And when these areas, these two beautiful disciplines connect, there's a tremendous kind of awareness that arises. That connection really serves like a catalyst. So catalysts are always needed where there's some kind of obstacle, whether it's two chemicals coming together that need an enzyme, or it's something that generates a creative spark for an artist. So you very much need a catalyst. And when art and science connect, that catalyst happens. And people arrive at a very tremendous awareness when an artist and a scientist can communicate and cross those disciplinary barriers. There's new ideas, new innovations. I would say a great passion arises, and people can feel a creativity and a way of seeing the world that they haven't been able to arrive at before.
Wow.
And I'm glad you talked about the challenges of our current world. There's never been a time when we needed that spark of passion, of curiosity, of freedom to create across disciplinary borders. There's never been a time when it was more needed. So in this work, we see people arrive at a freedom to pursue challenges, to come up with new ideas, whether those ideas are cultural, whether they contribute to commerce and industry, maybe to society, maybe to what we're researching, how we're researching it, and how we're translating those ideas for the world. I feel that especially for environmental literacy, the connection between art and science is absolutely essential, and a way that students can start to leave the realm of despair over what's happening to the environment and start to look for new solutions, new ways of doing things, new ways of overcoming these challenges. In our society and in our academic institutions, there's these very staunch separations between the arts and the sciences. And I always think of a really incredible person, E.O. Wilson, the late E.O. Wilson. He was a great naturalist, a biologist, a philosopher, and he wrote a book called Consilience about arguing. I mean, this was back in the 90s. He wrote a book arguing that we must bring the arts and the sciences together to arrive at what's needed under the challenges of the 90s, but he was projecting all the way out to times beyond his lifetime. And he said, all these separations, they're not reflections of the real world. They're just artifacts. They're artifacts of scholarship that we need to overcome. So when we can move past those artifacts, we find ourselves in this very rich, kind of creative territory that I've witnessed in my own practice is transformational for people. So they arrive in this place where art and science connects, and it's like a new door opening in which they go through a process of self-discovery and start looking at things, observing things in a very different way, with fresh eyes, if you will. And when that happens, they arrive at new insights and new respect for the world around them. So as they look at nature and they become more observant and they start to look at the art of nature and bringing that art together with a scientific understanding, they find this space in which I would say it's like an enlightenment in a respect. And once they do that, they start to understand the world around them. And that's the point in time when they become more interested in saving it. And that's why I think there's such a strong connection back to environmental literacy. You don't have a passion to save something you don't understand and you don't love. But once you love it and you understand it, that passion and that willingness to do what needs to be done can really, I would say, blossom.
When I was a kid, there was sometimes in science fiction, the mad scientists or like the scientists wanted to destroy the world, and it couldn't be more remote from the reality, because the more I meet with scientists, the more I find proximity of thinking between scientists and artists, because we all are curious about the mystery of lives, but also we're all seeking for the beauty of it, and we're not about power or politics, you know. So if I was to rewrite the movies, it would be more like the bad business person who invests in order to use the science to a bad end. But the scientific people basically are in love with life, because, you know, if you want to spend time studying, it extends to mathematics, the beauty of the mathematics. I mean, I've spoke with mathematicians that are as passionate as a violin player talking about music. So it's And you're right, the environment is at a crucial, like, do we respect life? Are we curious about life, discovering more about life? Scientists and artists say yes. But the more we're together, I think the more it will be clear for people who are not scientists or artists. We have this moral responsibility, us people in touch with the life, beauty, and fragility.
There's more similarities between scientists and artists than there really are differences. But I can assure you that you could walk into any art department or any science department in the nation, for the most part, and they would be more immediate in telling you all the differences. But in fact, artists are curious about their world. They are incredibly observant. That's true of scientists, of course, very observant people. It's integral to the sciences, and curiosity is integral to the sciences. So we have those things in common. And while maybe on the side of art, the experimentation may become more intuitive, whereas we're kind of set in certain ways of doing things in the sciences, but we both experiment. Every great artist that I've had the pleasure to interact with is always experimenting with their medium and pushing the envelope. And it's the same in the sciences. We are constantly experimenting. It's everything for us. So there's so many similarities between these two areas. And when we're at the same table, extraordinary solutions can arise. And I'm thinking right now of David Edwards, who is a professor at Harvard, and he started his career in the sciences, but eventually made connections into the arts. And through his work, he started a place in Paris, actually, called Le Laboratoire, where he brought scientists and artists together. And all kinds of incredible inventions have come out of his willingness to create these connections. So, I think that when you bring these different points of view to the table, then you arrive at solutions the two sides never would have thought of alone. There's a synergy
Absolutely
that happens. And for me, as a university professor, my passion around this is really education. So, and I mean education broadly, the general public, the undergraduates on the campus, the graduate students on the campus, outreach into kindergartens and grade schools and high schools. I have a real strong passion for education. And one of the things that I've loved about the strategies that have grown out of the Art Science Fusion program is that they extend. So we have often created large-scale public art that's permanently installed.
Okay.
Sometimes the artwork is individual and the students carry it home with them. But in this framework, the students really become their own teachers in a way. It's very much a process of discovery. And it is, of course, can apply to any of the arts. So in the Art Science Fusion program, we have had a lot of visual arts, ceramics, painting, textiles, film, and then also performing arts, dance, songwriting. We've had a professor who teaches art and science through photography.
Can you give more examples on how you can teach science with photography, for example?
Sure. So the professor that teaches that course, his name is Terry Nathan.
Okay.
He's an atmospheric scientist at UC Davis, and he's also a fine arts photographer. So when he works with the students, he starts having them connect the way you think, for example, about light and how that connects to how you compose photographs. And part of their assignments, they have several assignments during the range of the quarter, but one of the things they do is they go out onto the campus and they look for their own examples where art and science may connect. And then they create photographic compositions around that. So they're learning about light and atmosphere and illusion. You know, one of the things that Terry has done in his own practice is to create these illusions of clouds forming. And he's just using a candle and smoke. So they learn about illusion, they learn about using light.
What was the origin? Why did you create it? And what sparked the first idea? And how did you gather people? Because it's something fairly new. How do you gather everybody to get involved in that new field?
So I joined the faculty at UC Davis in 1995. And I was at a bit of a crossroads in my own life because I had breast cancer, a very aggressive case of breast cancer. So I had lived through chemotherapy. I had a little daughter, and I was really deeply engaged in my scientific pursuits. But I felt that there was kind of a lack of meaning to what I was doing. And I was really, really reaching for that as I arrived at UC Davis. And I got my PhD at UC Davis. So one of my most important scientific mentors was in the department that I ended up coming back to as a faculty member. So you'll find in a lot of institutions that when you step outside of the norm, it's not appreciated by your colleagues. And you face a lot of pushback, if you will. But I don't really think it was that was holding me back. I just don't think I had enough experience to realize the power of what I was actually doing. And once that evolved and I started to realize that, I began to bring the artistic expression back into the laboratory. And I think one of the ways that it influenced my work the most was that when you're working, so I work with insects that transmit plant viruses. And it's very complex. The insect has to get the virus out of the plant. It has to go to the right places in the insect's body. Sometimes it has to replicate in the insect. And then the insect has to get it back into a new plant. So there's all kinds of complexities on an ecological level, on an organismal level, and even down to molecular levels. And I would be working very hard, testing a hypothesis, and then not always understand where my data was leading me. And I found that if I started to try to illustrate that, started to try to create a graphic that would let me explain it to somebody else without words, it opened up a way of thinking for me that actually began to lead me to my next hypothesis and lead me to start to see what I understood well, what I didn't understand well. So, to give you an example, maybe, I was involved in a genome project to get the genome of this very, very tiny little insect called the western flower thrips. It's a tiny little insect. It loves to feed on flowers, but it transmits these very, very damaging viruses. And we wanted to get the genome of this insect. And, it turns out it's tiny, but it has like 17,000 genes,
Wow.
So we're trying to annotate them and understand what they do and put them into categories. And finally, as we were trying to write all of this, somebody came to me and said, can you put this into a conceptual framework that's visual so we can better see where we're going? And I ended up doing that. It was actually a tremendous amount of fun for me. And I actually started to understand the science better than I did going into the process. And it ended up being a figure in the genome paper. So it's the opening for the genome paper.
Wow.
So anybody who comes to that can look at that graphic and with very few words understand the very complex genome of that insect and actually see the insect. Because it's so tiny, without a microscope, you wouldn't be able to see it very well. But in the photographs that we were able to publish, I was able to show that. So a lot of times it brings understanding for me, and also the ability to communicate to other people.
Absolutely.
And you know, the sciences, we're not famed for explaining our science very well. And I think art science fusion gives us a pathway to that. It gives us an avenue where we can take very complicated things and make them visual so that people can see what we're trying to communicate without having to understand every little detail or worry about the vocabulary, you know, or things like that. So I think it's very important in that way.
Wow. In a minute, I'm going to continue this conversation with Art Science Fusion co-founder and renowned entomologist Diane Ullman. Fans go first. Whether it's early access to seasonal deals or pre-sales, pick your tickets before everybody else. Sign up for Club Cirque today, and you'll be the first to hear about access to special events, pre-sales, and discounts. Take a look behind the curtain and enjoy up-to-date news on all things Cirque du Soleil, including shows, artists, and latest innovations. Visit cirquedusoleil.com to subscribe. In Cirque du Soleil shows JOYA. In this show, we follow our young protagonist on her fantastic journey to gather all the knowledge of the world. And along the way, she receives guidance from her grandfather's assistant.
Well, I think it's a beautiful idea of a grandfather passing his love of knowledge to his granddaughter, and for the granddaughter to be willing to carry that flame of knowledge forward.
You used the word epiphany a bit earlier. Tell us maybe about another moment of epiphany in your whole journey into art and science. Moments of okay, if I didn't have that approach, I wouldn't have gone to that conclusion or that discovery.
I think when that has happened for me, those moments of epiphany, it has been when I'm doing artwork that actually might have nothing to do with the topic I'm thinking about. But the act of creativity that occurs when you are really into a piece that you're working on. It doesn't matter if it's something you're painting or you're creating out of a sculpture out of clay. It takes your mind to a very particular place that I find I don't arrive at that particular place in my thinking without being involved in the creative process of creating art. And in that state, I have had epiphanies about my science and understood connections between things that I just was missing, or realizing that I've been thinking about something in the sciences so hard and with so much intention that I have actually failed to see the bigger picture around it. So for me, that's where I've had the greatest epiphanies, I think, from my artwork.
So in the world of art science, for you, art is the opening door.
Art is the opening door for me in the sciences. And I feel that the science I've done has gone much further than I might have taken it. if I hadn't had that outlet. And it also is important for my soul. And I can bring that energy back to my science, to my writing of my science, because scientific writing can get kind of dry.
Yeah.
But I find that if you have that creative streak going in your mind, you can bring that into your writing and make science more exciting to read about.
It seems almost like art is the permission to be emotional in science, no?
I think that's a great point, really, because I think a lot of times people want to keep the science free of that emotion. And there's good reason to be methodical and logical and all of that in doing your science. But I think bringing the emotion back into it gives it another dimension. And it allows you to see things. It allows you to be more observant in a new way. So I think that's a really important point. I'm glad you asked that question.
I want to hear your thoughts about the educational system as it exists today, and how is it maybe already transforming into something more evolved? As the art science fusion program evolve, also the way that you look at discovery and a transfer of knowledge?
Well, in answer to the last question, art science fusion has entirely transformed my view of how people learn. And I've come to realize that self-discovery is absolutely critical in order for people to remember the information that they learn. Yeah.
Diane, I want to thank you so much. We were with Diane Ullman. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was really fun.
To the listeners, I want to thank you for your presence. Join us for each episode as we delve into the themes and ideas that underpin Cirque du Soleil shows. Learn more about the roots of creativity and how to keep your eyes, mind, and heart open to new sources of creative inspiration. And remember, it can come from anywhere and anyone. Thank you so much for listening to Cirque du Sound. I am Michel Laprise. À la prochaine.
Cirque du Sound is produced by Cirque du Soleil with technical and story production by Jar Audio.
If you liked what you heard today on Cirque du Sound, please subscribe, comment, and leave a review.